Doom is by far the most ported game in all of history. It runs on practically any console that has come out on the market, but that's not the interesting part. Because the best ports of Doom weren't even made by the developers, they were made by the community, from running Doom on refrigerators to pregnancy tests and even your ATMs. Yep, definitely not legal. But why do people have this obsession with making Doom run on anything, and why does it seem so easy to do it? Well, grab your popcorn, settle into the swamp, and let the mud swallow your feet for a bit, because I'm about to tell you the insane story of how Doom became the game that can run on basically anything. December 10, 1993, Doom hit the market. What started as just another PC game quickly exploded into a massive success, turning its developers at id Software into legends almost overnight. The studio itself was founded back in 1991 by John Carmack, John Romero, Tom Hall, and Adrian Carmack. id Software is a historic company. And two of its founders, John Carmack and John Romero, are very important names in the video game industry. Romero and Carmack met working at SoftDisk, which was a technology magazine that from time to time developed software to send it to its subscribers. And at one point at SoftDisk, they wanted to start developing games too, and basically they told John Romero, do everything yourself. Before Doom was even an idea, John Romero was already making small games that were starting to get attention in the gaming scene. And at that time at SoftDisk, a guy named John Carmack had also started working, and Carmack was a fan of Romero's work, so he wanted to impress him. Have you noticed how so many of the biggest games from the 80s and 90s were side-scrollers? You know, those games where the character stays in the middle of the screen while the world smoothly moves around them. Well, back then, doing that on a PC was basically considered impossible. The PCs of the late 80s did not have the power to run this type of games. Basically, PCs back then couldn't redraw the entire screen fast enough every single frame while everything was moving. And during those years, side-scrollers were huge. They were easily the most popular type of game at the time. People were literally buying consoles just to play games like that. And because PCs couldn't properly run those kinds of games, they were always seen as the weaker platform compared to consoles. A lot of companies and a lot of programmers tried to solve this problem, but none of them could do it because none of them were John Carmack. Then one night in 1990, John Carmack locked himself in a room with a computer, a Super Nintendo, a copy of Super Mario Bros. 3, and a pepperoni pizza, and that same night, John Carmack managed to create smooth side-scrolling on a PC. A 20-year-old guy achieved it in a single night, what the entire video game industry had failed to do for years. And the craziest part, the solution was actually pretty simple. What Carmack realized was that the PC didn't need to redraw the entire screen every single frame. Instead, the static parts of the image, like the sky or the background, could stay fixed without constantly being redrawn. And by doing that, he massively reduced the graphical load on the computer, making smooth side-scrolling finally possible on PC. Simple idea, but somehow nobody had thought of it before John Carmack. After that, Carmack showed his discovery to his friend Tom Hall. And together, in basically one night, they recreated the first level of Super Mario Bros. 3 on PC. And they called this little project Dangerous Dave in Copyright Infringement, which is honestly one of the funniest game titles ever made, so they took the demo and left it on John Romero's desk. And when Romero saw it, he was completely blown away, because side-scrollers were the reason consoles dominated gaming at the time. And if someone could bring that technology to PC, it could completely change the industry, and John Carmack had just done it. That moment basically marked the beginning of the legendary partnership between John Carmack and John Romero. And the craziest part, Carmack's technology was so good that he actually started porting Super Mario Bros. 3 to PC. And after Carmack and Romero had already recreated a few levels, they decided to go directly to Nintendo and pitch the idea. They basically walked into Nintendo and said, "Hey, what if we bring Super Mario Bros. 3 to PC?" And Nintendo's reaction was basically, "Release our exclusives on PC. Are you insane? Get out before we sue you." Which is honestly pretty ironic, because just a few years later, Nintendo would practically beg Carmack and Romero to make games for their consoles. But after that whole situation, John Romero, John Carmack, Tom Hall, and Adrian Carmack left Softdisk and founded their own company, id Software, and their first big hit was Commander Keen, which was basically the first PC side-scroller that actually felt like a real console game. After that, they kept developing smaller games and distributing them through something that was revolutionary at the time, the shareware model, and this model was honestly genius. Basically, people could download part of the game for free from the internet, but they only got access to around 30% of the full game if you wanted the rest. You had to literally call the developers, send them a check through the mail, and then they'd ship you the complete version of the game, and the best part for developers was that they saved a ton of money. They didn't need publishers, they didn't need physical stores, and they didn't have to give away a percentage of the profits to distributors, the only downside. These games had almost zero advertising. Their success depended entirely on word of mouth. And remember, this was the early 90s. Most people didn't even have internet access yet. Basically, Romero was the architect, and Carmack was the engineer. At this point, Carmack was already becoming famous for his graphics engines. The guy was basically a wizard with computers. He created a pseudo 3D engine for a game called Catacomb, which at the time looked absolutely insane. And later, he developed the Quake engine, the same technology that would eventually power games like the original Half-Life. Then came the Quake II engine, which would later be used for the first Call of Duty. There was actually a period in gaming history where it felt like every company was using technology made by John Carmack. And obviously, he wasn't giving that stuff away for free. Studios had to pay licensing fees to use his engines, so you can imagine the ridiculous amount of money flowing into id Software. Eventually, Unreal Engine would take over the market, but that's a whole different story. And thanks to Romero's creativity and Carmack's technical genius, id Software released Wolfenstein 3D in May of 1992, a game that completely revolutionized first-person shooters and turned id Software into one of the most important studios in gaming. And after making a ton of money with Wolfenstein 3D, the team decided they were now going to create the greatest game ever made. A game that would completely change the industry forever. Romero would design it, Carmack would make it possible, and before they even knew what the game was going to be about. They had already chosen the name, Doom, because they wanted the game to represent the doom of the entire gaming industry. And also because of a scene from a Tom Cruise movie.
What you got in there? Doom.
And when the game finally came out, people were blown away. Doom ran insanely well. The game was an absolute technical masterpiece. It became so popular that it basically became the face of the entire FPS genre. In fact, throughout the 90s and even part of the 2000s, people literally called most FPS games Doom clones. Being a copy of Doom was basically its own video game genre. And the game became so massive that everyone wanted it on their platform. Super Nintendo, 3DO, Atari Jaguar, Game Boy, PlayStation, Sega Saturn, everything was getting a Doom port. Everything ran Doom, and every single version had its own pros and cons. Some ports had to lower the graphics quality, others had to remove parts of the soundtrack, some versions even had to cut levels, enemies, and features just to make the game run. But honestly, nobody cared. Doom was so popular that every company wanted it on their system no matter what sacrifices had to be made. The game became so massive that even Bill Gates made a commercial where he literally inserted himself into Doom just to promote Windows 95. Yeah, that actually happened, but after a while, and after the development of Quake, Romero eventually left id Software because of creative differences with Carmack, and honestly, the two of them had become complete opposites. Carmack was basically addicted to work. The guy lived to code. Meanwhile, Romero had fully embraced the rockstar lifestyle that came with Doom's success. Parties, fame, excess, all of it, and because of that, Romero started spending less and less time at the office, to the point where the rest of the company basically asked him to leave. And eventually, he accepted, but Romero's story didn't end there. After leaving id Software, he founded his own studio, Iron Storm. And Iron Storm ended up making Daikatana, which is remembered as one of the biggest disasters in gaming history. But to be fair, the studio also created Deus Ex, which many people consider one of the greatest games ever made. But to be fair, John Romero had basically nothing to do with the development of Deus Ex. Anyway, let's go back to Doom, because the game became an absolute monster of a success, and even back then. It was already kind of a meme seeing every company desperately trying to port Doom to their systems. Every version had weird changes and sacrifices, but nobody cared, and remember, Doom was also released as shareware, which meant people could download the first part of the game completely for free from the internet. So basically, every computer had Doom installed. There was no escaping it. Doom was on every console, every PC, everywhere, and at the same time, almost every FPS game coming out back then was just trying to copy Doom. Seriously, throughout the entire 90s, it felt like there was only Doom. Everything else was just Doom but different, and little by little. This created the idea in people's heads that Doom was everywhere and could run on anything, but that idea reached its absolute peak in 1997. When John Carmack did something that almost never happens in the gaming industry. He released the source code of Doom to the internet. Basically, it was his gift to humanity. Now, for people who aren't super into programming, let me explain what that actually means. Imagine Doom is like Coca-Cola. Everyone drinks it, but nobody really knows the exact recipe behind it. Nobody knows the precise ingredients or the proportions that make it work. Now imagine the creator of Coca-Cola suddenly wakes up one day, goes completely insane, and uploads the full recipe to the internet for everyone to see, every ingredient, every measurement. Every step. That's basically what Carmack did with Doom's source code, and once the code was public, anyone could modify it however they wanted. They could add stuff, remove stuff, completely change the game, or even force it to run on things it was never supposed to run on. People could add things to the game, remove things, or completely modify Doom however they wanted. But there was one small problem. Because of copyright issues, Carmack was only allowed to release the Linux version of Doom's source code. He couldn't release the versions for MS-DOS or Windows 95, which were Microsoft operating systems, and back then, those were the systems almost everyone used on their computers. So the first thing the community did was take the Linux source code and make it run on MS-DOS, and honestly, they managed to create a port ridiculously fast. And once Doom had been ported to Microsoft systems, the floodgates were officially open, because now, basically anyone in the world could start messing around with Doom's code. And that was the moment where the millions of Doom ports truly started to appear. But there was another reason why porting Doom became so easy. The game was programmed in C, which is an extremely old, extremely common programming language, and because of that, most devices can already run C code without huge modifications. So developers didn't have to completely rebuild Doom for every system individually. They only had to adapt small parts of the code. And that's basically what gave birth to the legendary meme, "Can it run Doom?" And when I say anything, I genuinely mean anything. Of course, you have the normal Doom ports, like consoles that never officially received the game, things like the PSP, the Nintendo Switch, the PS Vita, the 3DS, Xbox, and a ton of others. But honestly, that's not even the fun part. The real fun starts when people make Doom run on things that have absolutely nothing to do with video games. And this got so insane that nowadays anytime people see a random piece of technology, no matter what it is, someone will always ask, "Yeah, but can it run Doom?" And the scary part is, a lot of the time, the answer is yes. So let's look at some of the weirdest Doom ports ever created, and trust me, we are not going into detail about how these were made, because we'd literally be here forever. We're just here to appreciate the chaos. First of all, yes, people got Doom running on calculators. And somehow, people also got Doom running on calculators powered by potatoes. Can Doom run on a treadmill? Of course it can. Can Doom run on an iPod? Absolutely, my king. A digital camera? Yep. People even managed to run Doom inside a virtual machine, inside Minecraft. Doom runs on pregnancy tests. Doom runs on tractors. It runs on office phones, karaoke machines, watches, and even the NES. It runs on Twitter, where people literally control the game through tweets. And because reality is apparently broken, people even manage to run Doom inside Doom itself. Everything runs Doom, and Doom runs on everything, and honestly, with enough determination. You could probably run Doom 2, and that is the story of Doom and why this game somehow runs on basically anything. So what's the moral of the story? Simple: if humanity puts enough effort into something, eventually someone will make Doom run on it. And never underestimate unemployed people with a lot of free time. And John Carmack. Love you all. See you next time. Bye.